The first contact. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning at SETI headquarters in California. Dr. Sarah Chen had been reviewing routine data when her computer screen suddenly flickered with an unmistakably artificial pattern. Within hours, the world's leading scientists confirmed what humanity had long dreamed of: first contact with an alien civilization. The Arxians, as they called themselves, appeared peaceful at first. Tall, crystalline beings that communicated through pulses of light, they arrived in ships that seemed to bend reality itself. Their technology was centuries beyond Earth's capabilities, and they offered to share their knowledge with humanity. There was just one condition: Earth would need to join the Galactic Concordat, an alliance of spacefaring civilizations. Admiral James Rodriguez, appointed as Earth's representative to the Concordat, sensed something wasn't quite right. During the initial negotiations, he noticed how the Arxians dismissed human concerns about sovereignty. "Your species is young," they would say, their crystalline forms shimming with what seemed like amusement. "You need guidance." The first red flag appeared when the Arxians began establishing administrative centers across Earth without consulting local governments. When Australia objected to a massive complex being built in the outback, the Arxians simply ignored them. Their response was always the same: "This is for your own good." Deep in the Pentagon's secured chambers, Admiral Rodriguez met with Dr. Chen and General Sarah Thompson. The meeting wasn't on any official record. "They're not allies," Rodriguez said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're colonizers who think they're doing us a favor." Dr. Chen pulled up historical data on her tablet. "Look at their pattern of expansion. Every civilization they've helped has eventually been absorbed into their empire. They don't use force, they simply make the species dependent on their technology, then gradually take control." General Thompson's expression hardened. "We need to send them a message. Something they'll understand." She paused, looking at the others. "Something that makes it clear we won't be controlled." The next day, Admiral Rodriguez stood before the Arxian Council. His message was simple: humanity appreciates your offer of assistance, but we must maintain our independence. Please don't make us angry. You wouldn't like us when we're angry. The Arxians' crystalline forms sparkled with what humans had learned to recognize as laughter. Their leader, High Administrator ZYX, spoke with barely concealed condescension. "Your species is barely 1,000 generations removed from living in caves. What could you possibly do that would concern us?" Rodriguez smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's exactly the kind of response that tends to get humans rather motivated. "I urge you to reconsider your approach." But the Arxians didn't listen. They never did. Within weeks, they began implementing mandatory technological integration protocols across Earth's major cities. They didn't use violence, they simply shut down human technology when we refused to comply. They thought they were being clever and humane. They thought humans would simply accept their superior technology and guidance. They thought wrong. As Rodriguez left the council chamber that day, he sent a simple message to Earth: Protocol Prometheus is now in effect. Across the planet, hidden laboratories that had been preparing for this possibility sprang into action. The Arxians had no idea that humans had been studying their technology since their first arrival, looking for weaknesses, preparing contingencies. They were about to learn why so many others throughout history had regretted underestimating humanity's resourcefulness when backed into a corner. The Silent Revolution. The first sign that humanity wasn't going to roll over came not with a bang, but with a whisper. 3 months after the Arxians began their technological integration, their crystalline administrative center in Sydney simply stopped working. No explosions, no violence, the building's advanced systems just went dark. High Administrator ZYX dispatched their finest engineers to investigate. They found nothing wrong with the technology, at least nothing they could detect. But Dr. Sarah Chen knew better. In a hidden facility beneath the Australian desert, she watched as the nanoscale modifications her team had spent months developing did their work. "It's beautiful, really," she explained to Admiral Rodriguez over a quantum-encrypted channel. "We didn't try to destroy their tech. We learned from it, adapted it, and then introduced our own modifications at a molecular level. They literally can't see what we've done because they never imagined anyone could crack their fundamental engineering principles so quickly." Across the globe, humanity's resistance took similar forms. In Lagos, students who had been forced to use Arxian educational interfaces began reporting strange glitches. Their human history lessons somehow kept overriding the Arxian-approved curriculum. In Mumbai, the atmospheric processors the Arxians had installed to optimize Earth's climate began producing data that contradicted their models. The Arxians responded by sending more administrators, more engineers, and more corrective protocols. But they were fighting a war they didn't even realize they were in. Humanity had learned from centuries of resistance movements. Sometimes the most effective rebellion isn't the loudest. General Thompson coordinated the global effort from a series of constantly moving command centers. "The beauty of it," she told her international team of operators, "is that they still think they're dealing with primitive natives who can barely understand their technology. Their arrogance is our greatest weapon." The turning point came when the Arxians attempted to implement their Phase 2 integration, a plan to directly connect human minds to their network. They presented it as a gift, a way to elevate humanity to their level of consciousness. What they didn't expect was for humans to say yes enthusiastically. "Of course we'll participate," Rodriguez told them, hiding his smile. "We've been looking forward to a closer connection with your civilization." The Arxian leadership was so pleased with humanity's apparent submission that they failed to notice the subtle changes in their own network. Dr. Chen's team had spent months preparing for this moment. As the first human volunteers were connected to the Arxian network, they brought something with them, a virus, but not like any virus ever created before. "We studied how their consciousness interfaces work," Chen explained to her team. "They think in crystalline patterns, pure logic, and perfect order. So we created something that thinks like us, adaptable, emotional, sometimes irrational. It's not malicious, it just introduces human chaos into their perfect system." The effects were subtle at first. Arxian administrators began experiencing something they'd never felt before: doubt. Their perfect logical systems began producing results that required interpretation rather than just calculation. They started asking questions they'd never considered before. In their arrogance, the Arxians had assumed that connecting to human minds would allow them to better control Earth's population. Instead, they had inadvertently exposed themselves to something they had no defense against: human creativity and unpredictability. As the first reports of Arxian systems behaving irrationally reached their homeworld, High Administrator ZYX began to feel something unprecedented: uncertainty. Perhaps they should have paid more attention to that warning about making humans angry. But it was already too late. The silent revolution had begun, and the Arxians were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons or technology, it was in their ability to adapt, innovate, and turn their adversaries' strengths into weaknesses. The Mind Storm. The Arxian Emergency Council convened in their crystal spire on their homeworld, their forms flickering with unprecedented patterns of distress. Something was very wrong with their perfect system, but they couldn't quite grasp what. Every time they tried to analyze the problem logically, their thoughts seemed to scatter like light through a cracked prism. "The Human Integration Protocol has achieved 97% efficiency," reported Administrator Vex, their crystalline form pulsing with confusion. "Yet our predictive models are failing. How can a species be simultaneously compliant and disruptive?" On Earth, Dr. Chen monitored the chaos unfolding across the Arxian network with a mixture of awe and concern. The human virus, as they had come to call it, wasn't just affecting their systems, it was changing how the Arxians thought. Their rigid, crystalline minds were being exposed to something they had never evolved to handle: human imagination. It's like introducing jazz to a computer programmed only to play classical music, she explained to Admiral Rodriguez. Their minds are perfectly ordered, designed to process everything through pure logic. But human consciousness is different. We dream, we imagine, we make intuitive leaps. When we connected to their network, we didn't just share our thoughts, we shared our way of thinking. The effects were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Archean ships began reporting navigation errors because their pilots started wondering, what if, instead of following predetermined protocols? Their quantum computers, designed to process reality through perfect mathematical models, began producing poetry. General Thompson's intelligence network reported increasing confusion among the Archean ranks. Some began questioning their society's rigid hierarchy. Others started experiencing something entirely new to their species. They began to dream. But the real crisis came when the first Archean child, in the middle of their strictly regulated education protocol, asked a question that sent shockwaves through their civilization. Why? The Archean leadership, in their mounting panic, made their final mistake. They attempted to forcibly disconnect from the human network, to purge what they saw as a contamination of their perfect system. But they discovered something terrifying: they couldn't. The human way of thinking had become part of them. In hidden facilities around Earth, humanity watched and waited. They had known this would happen. Unlike the Archeans, humans understood something fundamental about consciousness. Once you start asking questions, once you begin to imagine possibilities beyond the established order, you can never go back. They thought they were elevating us to their level of consciousness, Rodriguez observed, watching the reports flood in. Instead, we showed them that consciousness isn't a hierarchy. It's a spectrum. They thought their crystalline clarity was the pinnacle of evolution. We showed them the beauty of chaos. As the crisis deepened, some younger Archeans began seeking out human teachers, desperate to understand these new thoughts and feelings. They were experiencing something their species had never known: personal growth, individual desires, the ability to question and dream. Dr. Chen's team documented everything. This isn't just about resistance anymore, she noted in her secure log. We're watching the birth of something entirely new. The Archeans wanted to change us, but in trying to do so, they opened themselves to change instead. The Archean High Council, their once perfect consensus shattered by doubt and disagreement, faced an unprecedented situation. Their attempt to colonize and elevate humanity had backfired in the most unexpected way possible. They hadn't just failed to suppress human nature, they had infected their own civilization with it. And somewhere in the depths of space, other advanced civilizations began to take notice. The species they had dismissed as primitive had done something unprecedented. They had transformed their would-be conquerors not through violence or technology, but through the sheer force of their consciousness. The question was no longer whether humanity would join the galactic community on the Archeans' terms. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for the changes that humanity would bring. Galactic ripples. News of the Archean crisis spread through the galactic concordat like a quantum wave, impossible to contain or control. The most advanced civilization in known space, the one that had guided and governed countless species, was experiencing what their scholars could only describe as a collective emotional awakening. In the Concordat's Grand Assembly, representatives from 1,000 worlds watched in stunned silence as the latest reports arrived. The Archean delegate, once a model of crystalline perfection, now displayed swirling patterns of color that reflected their newfound emotional states. When they spoke, their usually precise statements were interspersed with something entirely new: metaphors. Our attempt to shape humanity, the delegate announced, their form shifting through shades of blue and gold, was like trying to capture starlight in a cage. We never understood that their strength lies not in their technology or their physical capabilities, but in their beautiful, chaotic way of seeing the universe. Admiral Rodriguez and Dr. Chen had been invited to address the assembly, a first for any human. As they stood before the gathered representatives of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, they could feel the mixture of fear and fascination emanating from the audience. "We tried to warn the Arxians," Rodriguez began, his voice calm but firm. "Not because we wanted to threaten them, but because we understood something they didn't. Humanity's greatest asset isn't our weapons or our technology, it's our adaptability, our creativity, and our relentless drive to question everything." Dr. Chen stepped forward, activating a holographic display that showed the spread of human consciousness through the Arxian network. "What you're witnessing isn't an attack or a virus in the traditional sense. It's simply the introduction of a new way of thinking. We didn't destroy the Arxian consciousness, we expanded it." The assembly erupted in a chaos of reactions. The silicon-based mechanids demanded quarantine protocols to prevent the spread of human thought patterns. The collective consciousness of the hive worlds buzzed with both terror and intrigue. The energy beings of the quantum realms pulsed with calculations trying to predict the implications. But it was too late for containment. The Arxians had already begun sharing their new perspectives with their closest allies. Reports came in of other species experiencing similar awakenings, rigid thought patterns giving way to creativity, strict hierarchies crumbling in the face of individual expression. General Thompson, monitoring the situation from Earth, received reports from her intelligence network about the changes rippling through galactic society. "It's like watching dominoes fall," she told her staff. "Every civilization that thought they were beyond emotion, beyond dreams, is discovering a part of themselves they never knew existed." The greatest irony, as Dr. Chen noted in her reports, was that the very network the Arxians had built to control and administrate their empire became the conduit for their transformation. The quantum-entangled communications that connected every corner of their influence now carried whispers of dreams, fragments of songs, and the dangerous idea that maybe perfection wasn't the highest goal after all. Some younger species in the Concordat, those who hadn't yet been fully guided by the Arxians, began openly seeking contact with Earth. They wanted to learn not about technology or weapons, but about art, music, literature, the aspects of consciousness that the Arxians had dismissed as primitive. As the assembly descended into unprecedented debate, Rodriguez sent a private message back to Earth: "They're finally beginning to understand. The warning wasn't about what we would do to them. It was about what they would do to themselves by trying to change us." The galaxy was changing, not through war or technological advancement, but through the simple, devastating introduction of human chaos into systems that had never known anything but order. The question now wasn't whether humanity would be accepted into the galactic community, it was whether the galactic community would ever be the same after encountering humanity. The Great Awakening. The Arxian homeworld had changed beyond recognition. Their once perfect crystalline cities now pulsed with colors that reflected the collective emotions of their inhabitants. In places where geometric precision once ruled, organic shapes began to emerge as the Arxians discovered their own capacity for artistic expression. Dr. Chen stood in their central archive, now transformed into something between a library and an art gallery, watching young Arxians create spontaneous light patterns in the air, their equivalent of dancing. "They're like children discovering play for the first time," she whispered to Admiral Rodriguez, who had joined her for this historic documentation. "We've discovered something remarkable in our studies," a young Arxian researcher named Lyx told them, their form shimmering with excitement, an emotion they had only recently learned to name. "Our crystalline nature, which we thought was only for perfect information storage, actually has the capacity for incredible creative expression. We just never knew to look for it." Back on Earth, humanity watched as their unintended revolution sparked changes across the galaxy. The mechanids, who had initially feared human consciousness like a virus, began experiencing what they called productive irregularities in their thought patterns. Some started creating art through mathematical equations that served no practical purpose, simply because they could. The hive worlds, which had operated on pure instinct and collective efficiency, began developing individual personalities within their colonies. The queens, instead of suppressing this development as a threat to unity, found that these unique perspectives made their colonies stronger and more adaptable. General Thompson's intelligence network reported that even the energy beings of the quantum realms, who had prided themselves on existing in a state of pure logic, began experimenting with something new. They started telling stories. "It's not just that we introduced chaos into their order," Dr. Chen explained to a panel of human scientists. "We showed them that chaos and order aren't opposites, they're complementary. The most beautiful music has both rhythm and improvisation. The most elegant mathematics contains both patterns and unpredictability. The Galactic Concordat, facing the greatest change in its million-year history, called an emergency session. But this meeting was different from any before. Instead of rigid protocols and hierarchical procedures, representatives were encouraged to speak freely, to share their species' experiences of awakening. One by one, civilizations that had looked down on humanity as primitive began sharing stories of transformation. The mechanids presented a collection of abstract art created by their quantum processors. The hive worlds performed a symphony composed by their newly individualized members. The quantum realms shared poems written in pure energy. Even the Arxians, who had started it all, stood before the assembly to make an unprecedented announcement. High Administrator ZYX, their form now a constantly shifting rainbow of emotions, spoke with genuine humility. "We thought we were the teachers of the galaxy, bringing order and progress to younger species. But humanity taught us the greatest lesson of all, that true advancement comes not from eliminating chaos and emotion, but from embracing them, learning from them, growing through them." As the assembly watched in amazement, ZYX did something no Arxian had ever done before. They created a spontaneous light sculpture, a beautiful and chaotic pattern that represented their species' journey from rigid order to creative freedom. Dr. Chen, recording it all for Earth's archives, realized that humanity had achieved something far greater than resistance or victory. They had sparked a renaissance across the galaxy, awakening ancient civilizations to new possibilities they had never imagined. "Perhaps," Rodriguez mused, watching the celebrations unfold across the assembly, "this is why we evolved the way we did. Not to conquer the stars with technology or weapons, but to remind the galaxy of something it had forgotten, the power of imagination, the beauty of imperfection, the strength that comes from embracing both logic and emotion." The Great Awakening was spreading, unstoppable now, transforming the galaxy not through force but through the simple, profound power of human consciousness. And it was only the beginning.